Basil is a universally loved herb. Nearly everyone I've ever met looks forward to growing fresh basil every summer. And I've taught countless people how to grow it even in winter. But what do you do when your basil plant fails? Either from over-harvesting, extreme weather, or factors unknown? Well, let's find out. Basil is one of the easiest herbs to do from seed. It germinates readily and quickly at around room temperature, and it doesn't require a huge container to grow an impressive bounty. But it's not always roses, and your basil plants can fail. They're subject to windburn, cold damage, drying out, over-harvesting, and they may even just use up all the goodness in their container. Restarting your basil plants again from seed is an easy and viable option, but it might not be the best one. In many cases, we can simply recharge and rescue our dying basil plants in just a few short steps. And this will be far faster than starting over again from square one. If you feel like your basil plant is maxed out and it's stalled in its growth, or even worse, maybe it's actually regressing, then follow along to get your basil back on track. Our first step is to actually remove the basil plant from its current pot or container. You can do this by simply bracing the top of the plant in between each of the stems and turning the container upside down. Don't pull on the stems themselves, they will easily break. Our main goal to reinvigorate our failing basil plants is to get its roots into a new batch of soil. There's actually two easy ways to do this. The first method is to simply divide the whole plant into 2 or more groupings of shoots. I grab a couple extra containers and I fill them about 3/4 full of a quality organic potting mix. Compress the soil down firmly to make a nice even landing pad. You can buy some really nice potting or container mixes at the store, or if you're feeling frisky, you can make your own at home. I'll throw a link in the description below on how I make my own DIY ultimate potting mix, so check it out if you have time. Before we do anything else, let's set up these containers to soak from below. They do have holes on the bottom, and they'll readily soak up that water in short order. We need the soil to be good and moist to avoid transplant shock for those basil roots. Whenever I redo a plant, I always try to take that bottom half of that soil root ball off. While those containers are soaking, let's divide up our failing basil plant. For this basil example, I'm just going to divide mine into 2 brand new plants. If our main goal is to get the basil into fresh new soil, removing as much of the old spent soil is priority number 1. I then look at the overall plant, searching for a good line to cut and divide it into however many sections I want. In this case, we're just cutting it in half, so it's actually quite easy. And now I'm left with 2 perfectly grouped basil plants ready to be established on their own. By now, our pre-filled containers are good and soaked, ready for action. Simply place the basil clump right on the soil surface in the center of that pot or container. Next, take some more of that same potting mix and fill in and around all the basil shoots. Compress the soil down slightly and ensure that all the roots are covered. Place the basil back in the tray to soak to moisten that new layer of soil that we just put in, and we're done method number 1. Method number 2 is much the same concept. Remove the basil plant from its old container, being careful not to damage those shoots. As you look closer, basil isn't a huge multi-shoot plant. Rather, it's actually a grouping of single-rooted shoots, each growing independently. Without very much effort, and not using any tools, we can actually divide the plant with our bare hands. pull the plants away from themselves by the roots in the soil, not by the shoots. The individual shoots pop off quite easily, keeping their extensive root systems intact. It's amazing how many roots there are for just one little single shoot. But it really explains how the soil in these pots gets used up so fast. As you work through the plants, place the separated shoots on some wet paper towel to keep them viable and to prevent them from drying out. It goes pretty quickly, and now is a good chance to discard some of the small runty stems and any of those that may have died off. As you go through the root ball, it gets easier and easier, with the last half dozen likely just falling apart on their own. It's amazing. That's quite a few shoots from just one small pot of basil. To set these new shoots up, we're going to use some small starter pots. In this case, the 4-inch flexible nursery ones. Fill them to the top with a quality organic potting mix, compress them down about 25%, and then top them off level again. Before planting, let's soak those pots with about 2 liters of warm water for around 2 hours. Again, always pre-soak that soil when you're working with bare-rooted plants. You gotta avoid the chance of transplant shock. For the individual basil shoots, there's actually 2 different ways to plant them. Let's start with the fast and easy way by making a large hole in the center of the pot with your favorite screwdriver. Next, grab 2 to 3 shoots of the basil and place them as deep as they'll go in the center of that hole. Pretty easy stuff. With the other method, we're actually going to make 2 smaller holes for individual stems. Obviously, this takes about twice as long, and with the extensive root system that these basil plants have, it's a little more finicky. Actually, it should be interesting to see which method grows better. On the one hand, the single method is giving the root systems that much more space for each plant, but at a greater cost of disturbance. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the pots and finish off that tray. Basil is pretty easy to work with, considering that it's an annual, lush, fast-growing herb. I finished the tray in short order. With the bunch method actually being twice as fast, I did 2 rows for it and 1 row for the single stem plantings. It'll be easy to tell which one is which, and maybe one method actually does grow better. I'll place these guys on a grow rack under optimal greenhouse conditions, at least until I know they've rooted and they're gonna grow. Also, it won't hurt to throw a dome over top to ensure 100% humidity and give those roots the best chance to take hold. Well, in less than a week, the basil's coming back to life. The leaves are twice as large and 10 times as green. New leaves are popping out everywhere. The first method, where we had minimal root disturbance and simply divided the plant in half, has been particularly impressive. With the second method, not every shoot made it, however. But this is to be expected. With the severity of root disturbance, some of the shoots simply can't handle the shock of the transition. In another 6 days, the progress is measurable. You can really see the basil shoots coming back to life and thriving in their new digs. Multiple new nodes of growth have started, and we can soon begin to top that basil to stimulate even more growth. Looking at method number 2, there doesn't seem to be any appreciable difference between the single stem and the bunch stem methods. In my opinion, if you're going to break up the mother plant that much, just stick with the ease of the bunch stem method, minimizing the root disturbance. The one plant we simply divided in half is doing amazing. You can't even really recognize the two plants combined from the state it came from just 12 days ago. Node after node of lush new growth. Honestly, if you want the easiest, most straightforward method to rescue a failing basil plant, this would be the way to do it. Basil is super easy to grow from seed and raise to an impressive plant. But not all basil does well. With a small amount of effort, however, you can get your basil plants back on track and growing like they should. Hey, thanks for watching, guys. If you're getting value in this and the other series that I'm doing on YouTube, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons if you'd be so kind, and I'll see you in the next video.